The mission was supposed to be simple. 3 days of observation, mark the patterns, wait for the perfect moment. One shot to eliminate the engineer. The Taliban bomb maker who had turned roadside dirt into American graves across 3 provinces, then disappear like smoke before anyone knew she'd been there. Staff Sergeant Reese Callahan had been lying motionless in her hide for 67 hours straight when she realized nothing about this mission would be simple. The Afghan sun had finally surrendered to the mountains bleeding orange and red across the jagged peaks to the west. Reese hadn't moved in 6 hours, not to stretch, not to shift weight, not even to scratch the insect bite on her neck that had been burning for the last 2 days. She controlled every breath, every heartbeat, letting her body become part of the stone and dust around her. 1,000 meters from the compound that intelligence had labeled Target Epsilon, most people couldn't sit still for 6 minutes. Reese had trained herself to remain frozen for 6 hours, then repeat the process the next day without complaint. At 29, she carried 8 years in the Marine Corps, the last 4 as a scout sniper in a reconnaissance unit that operated in places no official records would ever acknowledge. She was one of only 3 women serving as snipers in that unit, and the only operator who had passed the advanced urban sniper program with a flawless score. Her assignment sounded straightforward on paper. Watch the compound, track enemy movements, flag every high-value individual, and when the moment arrived, take out the engineer to disrupt Taliban operations throughout the region. Clean, professional, precise. But through her scope, Reese could see why this target had survived so long. 7 elevated hides ringed the compound like a crown of thorns. Professional sniper positions, not the amateur elevated guard posts she'd seen on a dozen other objectives. These were built by someone who understood angles, concealment, overlapping fields of fire. Each position commanded a sector that interlocked with the next, creating a web of coverage so tight that a mouse couldn't cross the valley without entering at least 3 kill zones simultaneously. Spectre 3. This is Spectre 3 Alpha, the voice murmured in her earpiece. Corporal Garrett Stone, her spotter, positioned 200 meters to her left in a secondary hide they'd constructed on day 1. Sun's down, time for your stretch. Copy, Reese whispered back, her voice barely louder than breath. She began her repositioning. Every movement was deliberate, calculated, microscopic. She shifted from one carefully prepared posture into another, allowing blood flow to return to half-numb limbs while maintaining absolute concealment. Her rifle, a custom 40A3, fitted with a suppressor and night optics, remained locked on the compound the entire time. Not once did her barrel drift off target. Through her scope, the compound stayed sharp even as daylight faded. Thick walls, guard towers, several structures inside the perimeter. Intelligence indicated the engineer operated from within those walls, planning the IED strikes that had killed 17 American soldiers in the last 3 months alone. But it wasn't the buildings that held Reese's focus. It was those 7 sniper hides. She'd been studying them for 67 hours, and everything about them screamed professional craftsmanship. These weren't local Taliban fighters playing soldier. These were Chechen mercenaries, men who'd learned their trade fighting Russians in the mountains of the Caucasus, trained in the same Soviet doctrine that had produced some of the deadliest marksmen in history. Garrett, you picking up on these sniper positions? Roger, counted 7. They've locked down every approach with overlapping fire. Nothing gets close without getting shredded. Reese examined each hide through her optic, committing their exact locations to memory. The positions were masterwork, blended seamlessly with natural cover, placed to maximize range while exposing almost nothing. Whoever had designed this defensive perimeter understood the sniper's craft at a level that demanded respect. These aren't local fighters, she muttered. Someone brought in experts to shield this site. Makes sense if the engineer's inside, Garrett replied. They're not gambling on amateurs. For the next 2 days, Reese charted everything about those hides, which positions had the cleanest angles, which rotated more frequently, marking them as priority posts, which shooters stayed vigilant, and which ones drifted into complacency after long hours on watch. She tracked every shift change, every habit, every microscopic flaw in their rhythm. She wasn't entirely sure why she was collecting such granular intelligence on the snipers. Her task was to eliminate the engineer, not engage the defensive perimeter. But long ago, she'd learned a lesson that had been hammered into her by the best teacher she'd ever known. The wider your understanding of a battlefield, the more choices you have when everything goes sideways. And things always went sideways. The memory arrived unbidden, as it often did when she was alone in the dark with nothing but time and her thoughts. A shooting range at Quantico, 18 months ago, early morning cold that bit through her uniform, and an old man with silver hair and eyes that had seen more death than most people could imagine. Reese had been failing. 3 attempts at the 1,000-meter qualification, and she'd missed the mark each time. The ballistic computer on her rifle gave her the data. The range was perfect, controlled no external variables. But the shots kept drifting, and she couldn't figure out why. "You're thinking too much, Callahan." She looked up from her scope to see Gunnery Sergeant Frank Bishop standing 10 feet away, arms crossed, watching her with the kind of patience that came from decades of teaching young Marines how not to get killed. At 77 years old, Bishop should have been long retired, sitting on a porch somewhere telling war stories to grandchildren. Instead, he'd volunteered to return as a guest instructor at the Marine Scout Sniper School, lending his expertise to a new generation that increasingly relied on technology he'd never had access to during his own combat tours. Korean War veteran, Frozen Chosen, Incheon Landing. Names from history books that still carried weight among those who understood what had happened on that peninsula in 1950. "With respect, Gunny, the ballistic computer is giving me perfect data," Reese said, frustration creeping into her voice despite her best efforts to suppress it. "And it's failed you 3 times today," Bishop replied, his tone conversational, almost amused. "Maybe try something different." "Like what?" Bishop walked to the firing line and knelt beside her. He held up one weathered hand, licked his index finger, and held it up to the wind. Then he turned his face slightly, letting the breeze brush his cheek. His eyes scanned the distant target, noting the way heat shimmer danced above the ground, the way dust moved along the berm. "Korea, winter of 1,950 inches," he said quietly. "I was dug in on a ridgeline overlooking a valley the Chinese wanted badly. Temperature was 20 below zero. My spotter was dead. My scope was fogged. My rangefinder was frozen solid. And I had one shot to take out an officer coordinating an assault that would have overrun our position and killed 40 Marines." Reese listened, sensing this wasn't just an old man's war story. No ballistic computer, no laser rangefinder, no thermal optics. Just me, my rifle, and everything I learned about reading wind with my body instead of a machine. He looked at her. "I made the shot. Saved those 40 men. You know what? Why, Gunny? Because I learned the old ways. The ways that don't require batteries or satellites or computers that fail when you need them most." He tapped the side of his head. "Human skill endures, Callahan. Technology is a crutch. It makes you lazy. When it fails, and it will fail, what do you have left?" "Fundamentals," Reese said softly. "Exactly." Bishop stood, brushing dust from his knees. "Try it my way. Wet your finger. Feel the wind on your skin. Look at the mirage. Read the environment like your ancestors did before we had machines to do our thinking for us." Reese wanted to argue. She'd been trained on modern equipment, taught to trust the data, to let technology handle the variables, while she focused on trigger control and breathing. But 3 failures had proven that approach wasn't working today. She holstered her rangefinder, turned off the ballistic computer, licked her finger and held it up, feeling the subtle shift of air across wet skin. She turned her face into the wind, letting it whisper against her cheek. She looked downrange, watching how dust moved, how heat shimmer bent light. Then she made her adjustments. Not from a computer readout, but from feel, from observation, from the accumulated wisdom of generations of snipers who had made impossible shots long before satellites existed. She settled behind her rifle, controlled her breathing, let her heart rate drop to 52 beats per minute, found the natural pause between heartbeats, and fired. The target lit up, perfect center mass, 1,100 meters. Bishop's hand came down on her shoulder, the grip firm and approving. "That's it, Callahan. That's the old ways. The ways that never fail because they're built into your bones, not a circuit board." Over the next 3 weeks, Bishop taught her everything he'd learned in Korea. How to read wind by watching grass bend. How to estimate range by comparing known sizes to unknown distances. How to wait absolutely motionless for 18 hours straight because patience killed more enemy soldiers than quick shots ever would. He taught her his mantra, the words he'd whispered to himself in frozen holes on Korean ridgelines while Chinese artillery screamed overhead. One shot, one breath, one chance, don't waste it. He also taught her about choices, the kind that haunted you long after the shooting stopped. "Korea 1,950 inches, he told her one evening as they cleaned rifles together in the armory. "I was pinned with my squad. We had a mission, destroy a supply cache before the Chinese could use it. But to do that, we had to move through an open area. My best friend, Corporal Eddie Walsh, volunteered to provide covering fire while we ran." Bishop's hands slowed on his cleaning rod, his eyes distant. "I told him not to. Told him we'd find another way. But he insisted. Said the mission mattered more than one man." Bishop's jaw tightened. "So I let him. We ran. He covered us, and a Chinese machine gunner cut him in half. The silence stretched between them. We destroyed the cache. Mission success. Saved American lives down the line. Bishop looked at her. But I see Eddie's face every morning when I wake up. 60 years later, and I still wonder if I made the right call. What's the lesson, Gunny? Reese asked quietly. The lesson is there's no easy answer, Callahan. You'll face choices where every option is terrible and someone gets hurt no matter what you decide. When that moment comes, don't ask yourself what I would do or what some general in a command center would do. Ask yourself, what kind of Marine do I want to be? What choice can I live with when I'm 70 years old and looking back? He handed her his Korean War range card, a piece of battered paper covered in handwritten notes stained with dirt and what might have been blood from 7 decades ago. Keep this, reminder that the old ways work, and reminder that every shot you take has consequences beyond the target. 3 months later in August 2010, Gunnery Sergeant Frank Bishop died of a massive heart attack while teaching a class on wind estimation. He was 78 years old. He died doing what he loved, passing knowledge to young Marines who would carry his lessons into battles he'd never see. Reese had wept at his funeral. Then she'd placed his range card in a waterproof case and carried it on every mission since. The memory faded as Garrett's voice cut through her earpiece sharp with sudden urgency. Spectre 3, I've got movement. American operators. Looks like a SEAL element coming in from the North Valley. Reese swung her scope toward the coordinates Garrett referenced, and her stomach dropped like a stone. 8 operators in full combat kit were advancing through the valley with solid fieldcraft, moving directly toward the compound, moving directly into the interlocking kill zones of 7 Chechen snipers who would cut them apart before they got within 500 meters of the target. Garrett, are they on any frequency we can monitor? Scanning now. Got them. Standard JSOC tactical frequency. Want me to reach out? Negative. Let me listen first. Reese tuned her comm system to the channel Garrett indicated and monitored the SEAL team's communications. They were conducting final reconnaissance, moving toward a vantage point that would give them visual coverage of the compound. Then she heard the team leader's voice, calm and professional despite what he was reporting. Gridiron Command, this is Neptune 1. I have visual on target compound, counting 7 elevated sniper hides with overlapping fields of fire, professional placement, mutually supporting positions. A pause. Recommend mission abort. Any attempt to advance will put us in multiple simultaneous kill zones. This is a no-go situation. Repeat mission is no-go. Reese had been studying those 7 positions for 71 hours. She knew their arcs of fire, their dead zones, their rotation schedules down to the minute. She knew that if those SEALs tried to push forward with those Chechen shooters active, the result would be catastrophic. She listened as the SEAL commander, call sign Neptune 1, reported the situation to his higher command. She heard the resignation creeping into his tone as he recognized his team couldn't advance without taking casualties they couldn't afford. Through her scope, Reese shifted her gaze from the 7 sniper hides she'd memorized to the SEAL team pinned in the valley below. 8 men. Good operators, doing a hard job, about to either die trying to advance or fail their mission by withdrawing. Bishop's voice echoed in her memory. What's the point of all this skill if you don't use it when it counts? She made her decision in 3 seconds. Reese keyed her mic to the SEAL frequency, her voice calm and steady. Neptune 1, this is Phantom Angel. I have visual on all 7 sniper nests. Give me 12 minutes and your route will be wide open. The silence that followed lasted 3 heartbeats. Then the SEAL commander responded, cautious but disciplined. Phantom Angel, identify yourself. Before Reese could answer, a different voice cut into the channel. Higher command, somewhere in a tactical operations center far from this valley. Neptune 1, stand by and hold position. Phantom Angel, you are cleared for engagement. Make it clean. The SEAL commander acknowledged, though Reese could hear the confusion in his tone. He likely assumed she was some classified asset. Delta Force or CIA Special Activities. A program with deeper clearance than his team had been briefed on. They had no idea she was a Marine Scout sniper who had simply been in the right place at the right time with 71 hours of reconnaissance on every threat they needed eliminated. Garrett, Reese whispered to her spotter, I'm going to drop all 7. Maintain watch and be ready to back me if this goes sideways. Copy. You want me reporting this to our command? Not yet. Let's see if I can actually pull this off first. Reese settled behind her rifle, her breathing slow and controlled. 7 trained snipers, 12 minutes. Distances ranging from 600 to 1,100 meters. Each one capable of alerting the others the instant something felt wrong. She would need every ounce of skill Bishop had drilled into her over those 3 weeks at Quantico. She started with the calculations. 7 shots in 12 minutes meant target order wasn't guesswork. It was a precise sequence determined by threat priority detection probability and the cascading effects of each kill. Bishop's teaching from Korea. Start with the best shooter. He'll spot your work first. End with the worst. He won't notice until it's too late. Reese studied the 7 positions through her optic, her mind running numbers built from 8 years of training and Bishop's half-century of accumulated wisdom. Target priority established itself like a mathematical proof. Position 2, Eastern Ridge, elevation 1450, range 1089 meters. The best shooter of the 7 Chechens, the one with the sharpest discipline and the widest visual access to the other positions. Taking him first removed the most dangerous set of eyes that could catch a muzzle flash or scope glint. Position 7, Western Ridge, 923 meters out, covering the SEAL team's most probable approach route. Second priority because eliminating him would clear the path the operators needed most. Position 5, North Tower, 654 meters, closest to Reese's own height and therefore the riskiest if he caught even a faint reflection from her scope. Position 3, Southern Approach, 847 meters, good shooter but not exceptional. Position 6, Eastern Approach, 789 meters, covering the main gate. Position 1, Northern Valley, 712 meters, watching the same area where the SEALs currently held position. Position 4, Elevated Hardpoint, 968 meters, the toughest shot, saved for last because if she needed to abort, this one could wait. Reese reached into her chest pocket and pulled out Bishop's Korean War range card. The paper was yellowed and fragile. The handwritten notes faded, but still legible. She touched it gently like a talisman. "One shot, Gunny," she whispered. "One breath, one chance." She returned the card to her pocket and brought her eye to her scope. Target 1, Position 2, the best Chechen shooter, range 1089 meters. The wind had shifted since sunset, dropping from 5 miles per hour to 3 coming out of the west-northwest instead of straight west. The temperature was falling fast as night settled over the mountains, and that temperature drop would affect her ballistic trajectory in ways that computers could calculate, but her body could feel. Reese licked her finger, held it up, felt the wind kiss wet skin, turned her face slightly, letting the breeze whisper against her cheek. Watched the way dust moved across the compound below. Read the mirage shimmer through her scope glass. The old ways, Bishop's ways, the ways that didn't require batteries. She dialed her scope, making minute adjustments for distance, wind, and the cooling air. She steadied her breathing, letting it fall into the rhythm she'd practiced 10,000 times. 4 seconds in hold, 4 seconds out. Find the natural pause between heartbeats. That's where the shot lives. The suppressed M40A3 was an extension of her body now, as familiar as her own hands. She'd fired this exact rifle on hundreds of training ranges in dozens of real-world engagements. She knew its personality, its quirks, the way it preferred to be held. Through her scope, the Chechen sniper in Position 2 was a clear silhouette against the darkening sky. Professional, disciplined, dangerous, about to die without ever knowing he'd been targeted. Reese found the pause between heartbeats. Everything slowed, everything narrowed to this single moment. This one perfect instant where breath and will and training aligned. She whispered Bishop's mantra one final time. One shot, one breath, don't waste it. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger. Smooth pressure, no jerk, no anticipation. Just the steady squeeze Bishop had taught her. The fundamentals that transcended technology and theory, and everything except pure human skill, refined through repetition. The rifle exhaled. A muted cough rather than a conventional shot, the suppressor doing its job. Reese watched through her scope as the round crossed 1089 meters in just over 1 second, tracking its flight through the optic. Seeing it arrive exactly where she'd intended. The Chechen in Position 2 collapsed instantly, one moment vigilant and alive, the next gone without ever making a sound, without ever having a chance to warn anyone. Time elapsed 1 minute 4 seconds. Reese cycled her bolt, smooth, automatic, thoughtless, the muscle memory of thousands of repetitions. A fresh round chambered with a metallic whisper that was lost in the mountain wind. She didn't acknowledge the kill, didn't pause to confirm. She simply transitioned to her next target. Target 2, Position 7, Western Ridge, 923 meters. 11 minutes, 56 seconds remaining, and 6 Chechen snipers who had no idea the Reaper was already among them. Target 2 materialized in Reese's scope like a ghost taking form. The wind on that side of the compound behaved differently, disrupted by the valley topography into unpredictable swirls and eddies that made compensation more art than science. Reese had tracked those patterns for 3 days straight, watching how dust moved, how heat shimmer bent at different hours, how the compound itself generated a microclimate that distorted airflow in ways no computer could predict. She compensated now without conscious thought, her adjustments born from 71 hours of pure observation. She fired. The Chechen in position 7 dropped like a puppet with cut strings, 2 down. Neither had made a sound. Neither had given the slightest alert to the 5 remaining shooters that death was working its way through their ranks with methodical precision. Time 2 minutes 18 seconds. Reese cycled the bolt again, the motion so practiced it required no mental bandwidth. Her mind was already running calculations for the next target, her body simply executing the mechanics. Target 3, position 5, northern tower, 654 meters. This was the shot that worried her. Position 5 was the closest high to her own location, which meant the shortest distance, which meant the highest probability that the Chechen might catch a scope glint or muzzle flash despite the suppressor. The tower's elevation also gave him a superior angle, better visibility across the ridgeline where she'd been lying motionless for 3 days. But the shorter distance also reduced environmental drift. Fewer variables between muzzle and target. Reese corrected for the upward angle, adjusted for the minimal wind at that range, and steadied her breathing. She was reaching for the trigger when her entire world shattered. The rifle bucked. The shot broke clean, but something was wrong. Through her scope, Reese watched the round impact 6 inches left of where she'd aimed, striking the stone wall of the tower instead of the Chechen's center mass. The suppressor had muffled the sound, but the bullet's impact on rock made a sharp crack that echoed across the compound. The Chechen jerked upright, his head swiveling, searching for the source of the sound. Confused but alert. Very much alive. And Reese's rifle bolt was jammed halfway open. Panic tried to flood her system. She crushed it down through pure discipline, her training screaming at her to stay calm, to think, to solve the problem. Her hands moved to the bolt, trying to cycle it. It wouldn't budge. Carbon buildup from sustained firing over 3 days, combined with the fine Afghan dust that infiltrated everything, had created enough friction to jam the mechanism at the worst possible moment. The Chechen in position 5 was still scanning, still searching. In seconds, he would either dismiss the sound as random noise, or he would become suspicious enough to radio the other positions. If he radioed, all 6 remaining snipers would go to high alert. The mission would fail, the SEALs would be stuck, men would die. Bishop's voice cut through her rising fear like a blade through cloth. Korea winter of 1950. My M1 Garand jammed in 20 below weather. You know what saved my life? I'd maintained that rifle like it was my firstborn child. I knew every part, every trick to clear it fast. When it jammed with Chinese soldiers 200 meters away, I had it running again in under a minute because I'd practiced that emergency clearance 1,000 times. Reese's mistake crystallized in her mind with brutal clarity. She'd trusted modern reliability. Assumed the M40A3's reputation for rugged dependability meant she could skip the obsessive maintenance Bishop had drilled into her. She'd cleaned the rifle adequately, but not meticulously. Good enough for most situations. Not good enough for this one. Her hands moved with desperate precision, executing the emergency field strip procedure Bishop had taught her. Not the standard manual method, the old way, the Korean War shortcut that could clear a jam in 70 seconds if you'd practiced it until your fingers bled. Reese had practiced it exactly that much. She popped the bolt assembly, cleared the carbon fouling with her thumbnail, reset the mechanism, slammed it home. The entire process took 73 seconds. 73 seconds during which the Chechen in position 5 continued scanning, his suspicion growing with each passing moment. She reacquired the target through her scope. The Chechen was settling back into his hide, apparently deciding the sound was nothing worth investigating. Reese didn't give him time to reconsider. Second shot. This time the rifle functioned perfectly. The Chechen collapsed forward across his weapon, looking for all the world like he'd simply fallen asleep on post. Time 4 minutes 28 seconds. 3 down, 4 to go. But Reese was now running more than a minute behind her mental schedule, and the adrenaline spike from the jam had pushed her heart rate to 94 beats per minute. She needed to calm down, needed to find that zone of absolute control again. Bishop's voice patient and steady. Fear makes you human, Callahan. Control makes you deadly. Feel the fear, acknowledge it, then put it in a box and do the work anyway. Reese forced her breathing into the 4-second pattern. In, hold out, pause, again, again. Her heart rate dropped. 86, 74, 62, back in the zone. Target 4, position 3, southern ridge, 847 meters. She was overcompensating now, being too cautious because of the jam, second-guessing her wind read. She recognized the pattern and corrected it. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Bishop had repeated that phrase so often it might as well have been tattooed on her forearms. Reese let her training take over. Trusted the fundamentals. Fired. The Chechen in position 3 sagged sideways, his rifle sliding free and clattering down the rocky slope. Perfect shot. Time 5 minutes 41 seconds. 3 targets remaining. 6 minutes 19 seconds left. Reese was cycling her bolt for the 5th shot when Garrett's voice exploded in her earpiece, raw with urgency she'd never heard from him before. Contact, I have contact. Through her scope, Reese saw movement near Garrett's secondary hide. A patrol. 4 Taliban fighters moving along a goat trail that shouldn't have had any traffic, heading directly toward the position where her spotter had been lying motionless for 3 days. Then she heard the sound that made her blood freeze. A single suppressed shot. Not from her position. Followed by Garrett's voice, tight with pain. I'm hit. Shoulder. There's an 8th sniper, Reese. Not in the intel. He spotted my hide and just put a round through my right shoulder. An 8th shooter. A counter sniper hidden somewhere in the compound, waiting for exactly this scenario. Watching for the watcher. And he just found Garrett. Reese's scope swept the compound, searching frantically for the 8th position. There. A window in the main building, 3rd floor, barely visible. A shadow behind dirty glass. The counter sniper was already shifting his aim, searching for Garrett's partner, knowing that snipers almost always worked in pairs. Searching for Reese. The tactical situation unraveled in her mind like an equation with too many variables. 3 Chechen snipers remained in their hides, positions 6, 1, and 4, each one still a deadly threat to the SEAL team. Each one needing to be eliminated for the mission to succeed. But Garrett was wounded, bleeding, with a Taliban patrol closing on his position and a counter sniper who would kill him the moment he moved. If Reese shifted targets to save Garrett, she'd lose precious time, fall further behind schedule, risk the remaining Chechens detecting her pattern and alerting the compound. The SEALs would be stuck. The mission would fail. If she maintained her sequence, eliminated the 3 remaining snipers on schedule, Garrett might be dead before she finished. The patrol would find him. The counter sniper would finish him. Her spotter, her partner for 18 months, would die while she focused on the mission. Bishop's hardest lesson crashed into her consciousness with the weight of 60 years of accumulated regret. She saw Bishop in the armory at Quantico, his weathered hands cleaning a rifle with meditative slowness, heard his voice describing Korea in 1950. I was pinned with my squad. Mission was to destroy a Chinese supply cache. My best friend Eddie Walsh volunteered to provide covering fire while we ran. I told him not to. He insisted, said the mission mattered more than one man. So I let him. We ran. He covered us, and a Chinese machine gunner cut him in half. The silence that had followed, the pain in Bishop's eyes, mission success saved American lives. But I see Eddie's face every morning when I wake up. 60 years, and I still ask myself if there was another way. Reese made her choice in less than 2 seconds. Garrett, how bad? Through and through, bleeding, but I can move. Patrol is 100 meters out and closing. Turn and burn, 30 seconds. I'm handling the counter sniper. Reese, that's not the mission. You need to clear the other 3 positions for the SEALs. Damn the mission, she whispered. I'm not losing you. She shifted her entire body, swinging the rifle toward the 3rd floor window where the counter sniper had taken his shot. 743 meters. Moving target behind glass. The window was closed, which meant the round would have to punch through before reaching flesh. The counter sniper was repositioning, trying to get a better angle on Garrett's hide. Reese had maybe 4 seconds before he fired again. And this time he wouldn't miss. Bishop's drill, the one he'd run her through 50 times until she could do it in her sleep. When thinking fails, when there's no time for calculation, trust your training. Your body knows what to do. Let it work. Reese didn't calculate when, didn't adjust for glass deflection, didn't run the ballistics. She simply aimed where her instinct said the shot needed to go and fired on pure muscle memory. The window exploded. The counter sniper pitched backward and disappeared from view. Garrett, he's down. Move now. Get to fallback position, echo. Go. Through her scope, Reese could see Garrett breaking from his hide, one arm hanging useless, sprinting for the secondary fallback they'd prepared in case either position was compromised. The Taliban patrol saw him and opened fire rounds, kicking up dust at his heels. But Garrett was moving with the desperate speed of a man running for his life. He made it to cover, disappeared behind a rock formation. I'm in echo. Jesus Christ, Reese. That was close. Time check. 7 minutes, 14 seconds. 3 sniper positions remained. Less than 5 minutes left, and Reese had just blown her carefully calculated sequence to hell by taking out the counter sniper first. She forced herself back to the mission. Force the fear for Garrett into that mental box Bishop had taught her about. Feel it, acknowledge it, lock it away. Do the work. Target 5, position 6, eastern approach. 789 meters. Position 6 was built differently from the others. More enclosed, better concealed. Reese had only a narrow viewing angle into the hide, could barely see the sniper's head and shoulders. It was a much smaller target window, complicated by the fact that the Chechen in that position had been the most disciplined of the 7, rotating his posture frequently to prevent stiffness. She watched him through her scope, waited with the patience Bishop had drilled into her. 18 hours motionless in Korea for one shot. 3 minutes here is nothing. The Chechen shifted, adjusted his stance, exposed his full profile for exactly 3 seconds. Reese fired in the middle second. Target 5 never sensed the round that killed him. Time 8 minutes, 37 seconds. 2 positions remain. 3 minutes, 23 seconds left. Target 6, position 1, Northern Valley, 712 meters. This Chechen was facing away from Reese's hide, watching the same valley where the SEAL team waited in the darkness. It gave her a clean angle, a shot into his back that he would never see coming. But it also made him the one most likely to spot the SEALs if they moved too early, if they got impatient, if they assumed the mission was taking too long and decided to advance before she'd finished. Reese shot without hesitation. The Chechen pitched forward, his rifle clattering off the ledge and dropping nearly 10 feet to the rocks below with a sound that echoed across the compound. Someone would investigate that sound. The noise was too distinct, too unusual. Time was running out. Time 9 minutes, 11 seconds. 1 target remained. Target 7, position 4, 968 meters, elevated hardpoint. The toughest shot she'd saved for last. The Chechen in position 4 was everything the others had been and more. Skilled, disciplined, alert. He used the shadowed cover of his hardened position to maximum advantage. His movements minimal, his fieldcraft excellent. And now, with the sound of his fellow sniper's rifle falling, he was becoming suspicious. Through her scope, Reese watched him tense. Watched him key his radio, probably calling to position 1, asking if everything was all right. Getting no response, growing more concerned, he began scanning. Not casually, seriously, looking for threats. Time 9 minutes, 47 seconds. 13 seconds until her self-imposed deadline. But the math had changed. She couldn't just wait for a perfect shot. The Chechen was about to raise the alarm, and if he transmitted a general alert, everything would collapse. Reese tracked him through her scope, searching for her opening. His head barely rose above the sandbags. The darkness complicated her range estimation. She waited. 1 second, 2, time 10 minutes, 53 seconds. Then he shifted, adjusting his optic, checking something. His head and upper chest exposed for what Reese knew would be less than 3 seconds. She didn't wait for the perfect moment within those 3 seconds. She took the first acceptable instant. The suppressed rifle exhaled its final round. Across 968 meters through the darkness, the bullet flew with the precision of 8 years of training and 3 weeks of Bishop's old ways drilled into permanent muscle memory. The Chechen fell back into his hide and vanished behind the sandbags. Time 11 minutes, 43 seconds. 17 seconds under her deadline. 7 hostile snipers eliminated in 11 minutes and 43 seconds. 7 flawless shots across ranges from 600 to 1100 meters through varying wind conditions in failing light, with 1 rifle malfunction and 1 emergency counter-sniper engagement, all without a single alert raised until the final 30 seconds. Reese cycled the bolt 1 more time, chambering a fresh round, then keyed her microphone on the SEAL frequency. Neptune 1, this is Phantom Angel. All sniper positions neutralized. Your route is clear. I'll maintain overwatch. Down in the valley, Commander Jackson Thorne had been watching what he could see of the engagement. He couldn't observe Phantom Angel's hide or most of the enemy nests, but he'd witnessed the aftermath. 7 snipers who had been scanning, shifting, maintaining vigilant watch over their sectors had all gone still. All stopped being threats. Phantom Angel Neptune 1 copies. That's the most impressive long gun work I've witnessed in 15 years of operations. What's your location for coordination? Elevated hide northwest of your position. I'll stay silent and unseen. You handle your part, Commander. I'll handle mine. Thorne glanced at his team. 8 SEALs who had just watched an unseen ally dismantle 7 entrenched snipers faster than they could have planned a single coordinated assault. "All right, team," he said quietly. "Path is open. Don't waste what Phantom Angel just bought us. Quiet infiltration, standard entry. We grab the package and extract before anyone realizes we were here." The SEAL element pushed forward with the smooth precision of operators who'd done this 1,000 times. They used the corridor Reese had opened by eliminating Position 7, crossed the valley in 4 minutes flat, reached the compound wall, and began their breach. From her hide, Reese tracked them through her scope, covering arcs of possible danger. The sniper threat was eliminated, but guards, patrols, and rapid response units were still inside those walls. The SEALs were good, but they were also outnumbered and deep in hostile territory. Phantom Angel Neptune 1, at inner wall, moving on the vault. Thorne's voice was barely a whisper over the comm. "Copy. 2 guards in the courtyard, southeast corner. They haven't spotted you yet, but they're on a patrol route that'll intersect your position in approximately 40 seconds. Reese sighted in on the guards through her scope, range 760 meters. They were partially shielded by an interior wall moving in and out of her line of fire. She had a narrow gap to shoot through if it came to that. "I can drop them, but the compound will go loud. How close are you to the package?" 30 seconds out. "Then you move fast. I'll wait until you secure it before I buy your exit if needed." She watched the SEALs work through her optic. They were exceptional. Within 20 seconds, they breached the vault, where intelligence indicated the engineer kept his operational plans, IED schematics, and network documentation. Thorne's voice came back over the comm steady, despite the circumstances. "Package secured. Moving to extract." That was when the operation came apart. An enemy patrol stumbled across the breach point. Maybe they'd heard something. Maybe they were just unlucky. Either way, within 2 seconds of visual contact, alarms began screaming across the compound. Floodlights burst to life, turning night into harsh day. Fighters poured from barracks and buildings, weapons at the ready, moving with the organized chaos of men who drilled for exactly this scenario. "Neptune 1, we're blown," Thorne reported, his voice still controlled even through the chaos erupting around his team. "Heavy contact. Engaging. Shifting to alternate exfil route Bravo." Through her scope, Reese watched the SEALs crash into close-quarters combat. 8 operators against what looked like 40 or 50 Taliban fighters, with more streaming into the compound every second. The odds were catastrophic. "Garrett," Reese called to her wounded spotter. "I'm providing overwatch for their exfil. Mark targets." "Copy." Garrett's voice was tight with pain but functional. "Jesus, Reese. I'm counting at least 40 hostiles converging on their position. 40 enemies, 8 SEALs, and 1 sniper 1,000 meters out who could start evening the odds." Reese settled behind her rifle and went to work. The enemy troops were flooding toward the SEALs from multiple directions. Standard counter-raid tactics, but most of them were crossing open ground to reach firing positions. She had clean lines on nearly all of them. Her first shot took an officer who was shouting directions, trying to coordinate the chaos. At 934 meters, Reese put a round through his chest. The command structure immediately fragmented without his voice. She cycled the bolt, found a machine gunner preparing to lay suppressive fire on the SEAL team from an elevated position, range 1087 meters. She dropped him before his weapon had fired a single round. "Phantom Angel Neptune 1, we're taking heavy fire from the east courtyard." Reese shifted to the courtyard, located 6 fighters using partial cover firing at the SEALs in disciplined 3-round bursts. She dispatched them methodically. Firebolt, firebolt, 4 down in 18 seconds. The remaining 2 realized an external shooter was picking them apart. They sprinted for better cover. Reese tracked the first one mid-run and hit him center mass. The last one reached concealment behind a concrete barrier, but when he leaned out to engage the SEALs, she had a 2-second window. She used it. "Garrett, feed me priority targets, anyone with heavy weapons or directing movement." "Roger." RPG team on the north wall, setting up to fire at the SEAL exfil vehicles. Reese found them through her optic. 2 fighters with a rocket system that could annihilate the SEAL extraction in a single shot. She eliminated the gunner at 896 meters, then immediately shifted to the loader, who was spinning in panic, trying to locate the sniper who just killed his partner. The rocket launcher clattered harmlessly to the ground. "Neptune 1, Phantom Angel, your exfil lane is clear of heavy weapons. Maybe 20 hostiles remaining, but they're disorganized and taking casualties. Move now." "Copy, Phantom Angel. Moving to exfil, and you just saved our asses again." Reese continued laying precision overwatch as the SEALs fought toward their extraction point. Every time the Taliban tried to reorganize, she eliminated whoever was attempting to lead them. Anyone carrying a heavy weapon system never got off a shot. She was burning through ammunition far faster than planned. Her loadout had been built for precision work, not prolonged engagement. But she wasn't about to let the SEALs get overrun after they'd risked everything for their mission. Phantom Angel, Neptune 1. We're at Exfil Point. Aircraft inbound. We're clear. Copy. Get out, Commander. I'll cover you until wheels up. Negative, Phantom Angel. You're coming with us. Send coordinates for pickup. Reese glanced at the hide she'd spent 3 days constructing, looked toward the fallback position where Garrett was bleeding. Calculated the tactical situation. Negative, Neptune 1. I have my own exfil plan. If I break concealment now, every fighter down there will know exactly where I've been shooting from. Better I stay invisible. Get your people out. She could hear Thorne's frustration, but also his acceptance of the tactical logic. The helicopters arrived, rotor beats reaching even her distant hide. The SEALs boarded. The mission was complete. Phantom Angel, when we're back stateside, I'm finding out who you are and buying you a very expensive drink. I'll remember that, Neptune 1. Safe flight. Phantom Angel going dark. Reese watched the aircraft lift off bank hard and vanish into the night sky toward friendly lines. Then she turned her attention back to the compound. Now fully awake lights blazing everywhere, fighters searching desperately for a sniper they would never locate. But there was still one target she hadn't eliminated: the engineer. Through her scope, Reese scanned the compound. The mission had been to observe and kill him when the opportunity presented itself safely. She'd abandoned that timeline to save the SEALs. But now in the chaos, she saw movement near the main building. A man emerged, older, authoritative bearing, surrounded by bodyguards, shouting orders, organizing the search. The engineer, the bomb maker, the man responsible for 17 American deaths and counting. Range 1,156 meters. Moving target. Dawn light starting to break, distorting her sight picture. Garrett wounded and waiting for exfil. Every smart tactical decision said to ghost out now. Disappear. Live to fight another day. But this was the mission. The reason she'd been here for 3 days. The kill that would disrupt Taliban IED operations across 3 provinces. Reese thought about Bishop's letter, the one his widow would give her months from now, the words about choices and consequences and living with your decisions. She thought about the 17 dead Americans, thought about the hundreds more who would die if the engineer kept building his bombs, made her choice. The engineer stopped walking, lit a cigarette. 3 seconds of relative stillness. Reese fired, 1,156 meters through shifting dawn light. The round flew true. The engineer dropped. The compound erupted into even greater chaos. And somewhere in the darkness, someone spotted the muzzle flash. Sniper North Ridge. 20 fighters turned toward her position and opened fire. The first round snapped overhead, like a bullwhip cracking. Supersonic cracks that told Reese the Taliban fighters had her general direction, even if they couldn't pinpoint her exact position. She had maybe 10 seconds before they triangulated her hide well enough to start putting effective fire on her location. Reese grabbed Bishop's range card from her chest pocket, shoved it deep into her cargo pants where it couldn't be lost. Then began the emergency collapse of her position. Everything had been prepared for this exact scenario. 3 days of careful construction meant she could dismantle the hide in under 30 seconds if she had to run. She had to run. Garrett, I'm blown. They made the muzzle flash, collapsing primary hide and moving to your position. Copy. I've got maybe 20 fighters breaking off from the compound search. They're heading up the ridge toward you. Reese slung her rifle, grabbed her essential gear, and abandoned everything else. The hide she'd occupied for 71 hours disappeared behind her as she scrambled down the backside of the ridge, using the terrain to mask her movement from the compound. Rounds were impacting closer now. The Taliban fighters were getting better angles, walking their fire across the ridgeline. A bullet struck rock 3 feet from her head, sending stone fragments into her face. She tasted blood, kept moving. The fallback position was 420 meters away, through broken terrain that would tear her apart if she tried to run it at full speed in the dark. But dawn was breaking, which meant the darkness that had concealed her for 3 days was evaporating fast. She covered the distance in just under 4 minutes, her lungs burning her legs, screaming, her rifle banging against her back with every bound across the rocks. Behind her, she could hear the Taliban fighters spreading out, searching, closing the distance. Garrett's fallback position came into view. A depression in the rocks barely large enough for 2 people camouflaged with native vegetation, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. She dove into it like a swimmer into water. Garrett was there, his right shoulder wrapped in a hasty tourniquet that was already soaked through with blood. His face was pale, his breathing shallow, but his eyes were clear, and his left hand held his sidearm steady. "About time you showed up," he said through gritted teeth. Thought maybe you decided to take on the whole Taliban by yourself. Got the engineer, Reese gasped, trying to catch her breath. Mission complete. Was it worth getting us both killed? She looked at him, saw the pain he was managing through sheer discipline, saw the blood loss that would kill him in hours if they didn't get medical evacuation soon. Ask me in 60 years, she whispered, echoing the thought that had been running through her mind since she'd made the choice to take that final shot. The Taliban search teams were spreading out across the ridge. Reese counted at least 30 fighters moving with decent tactics, checking likely hide positions, working in pairs to cover each other. These weren't amateurs. They knew how to hunt. She pulled out her radio and switched to the emergency exfil frequency. Gridiron, this is Phantom Angel. Mission complete. Primary target eliminated. Requesting immediate emergency extraction. One wounded, one effective. Current position, designated fallback, echo over. The response came back after a delay that felt like hours but was probably 15 seconds. Phantom Angel Gridiron copies your exfil request. Be advised your area is currently too hot for rotary wing extraction. You have approximately 30 enemy combatants in your immediate vicinity and more responding. Recommend you hold position and stay concealed. We'll extract you when the search pattern moves or disperses. Estimate 24 to 36 hours. Can you hold that long? Reese looked at Garrett's shoulder, looked at the blood seeping through the tourniquet despite the pressure. 24 hours he might survive. 36 was pushing it. Gridiron, my spotter needs medical attention sooner than 36 hours. Understood, Phantom Angel. We're working the problem. For now, hold position and stay invisible. Gridiron out. Garrett managed a weak smile. Guess we're staying for the extended vacation package. How bad is it, really? Through and through. Like I said, missed the bone, missed the major arteries. But I'm losing blood steady, and I don't have the supplies to do much about it. I'll make it to 24 hours, maybe 30. After that, he shrugged with his good shoulder. Reese checked her medical kit. She had enough to reinforce his tourniquet, maybe slow the bleeding, keep him stable. Maybe. We're getting out of here, she said. Both of us. I didn't burn my whole career saving your ass just to watch you bleed out in a hole. Your whole career, probably. Violated orders twice in one night. Supported an unauthorized SEAL operation instead of maintaining surveillance. Abandoned primary mission timeline to engage targets outside your assigned parameters. Then endangered your own exfil by taking a shot you shouldn't have taken. Pretty sure that's multiple articles of the UCMJ right there. He laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his shoulder. Yeah, but you got the engineer. You saved 8 SEALs. You probably prevented a couple hundred IED casualties. That's got to count for something. We'll see. Right now, let's focus on not dying. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Hour 1. The search teams worked the ridge, methodically sweeping back and forth in coordinated patterns. Reese and Garrett pressed themselves into the rocks, breathing so shallow their chests barely moved. The camouflage held. The fighters passed within 15 meters, twice never seeing them. Hour 3. The sun climbed higher, turning their hide into an oven. Sweat soaked through Reese's uniform, but she didn't move to wipe her face. Garrett's lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration, but they'd agreed to ration their water. They might be here a long time. Hour 6. The Taliban search teams methodically worked the ridge, getting closer, then drifting away, then circling back. Reese and Garrett remained absolutely still, not moving, praying the camouflage held. Hour 8. Garrett started getting delirious, his fever spiking from the wound infection that was setting in, despite the antibiotics Reese had given him. He talked to people who weren't there, called for his mother, called for someone named Sarah. It broke Reese's heart in ways combat never had. She kept him quiet, kept him still, monitored his pulse and respiration. The numbers weren't good. His pulse was racing, thready and weak, his breathing shallow and rapid. He was running out of time. Hour 12. The engineer's death had been confirmed by Taliban radio traffic Reese was monitoring. The compound was in chaos. Leadership was fractured, fighters arguing about who was in charge, accusations flying about security failures. But the search intensified because now it was personal. They wanted revenge. They wanted the ghost who'd killed their leader and disappeared into the rocks like smoke. Hour 14. Reese started hallucinating from exhaustion and stress. 3 days with almost no sleep, the adrenaline crash from the engagement, the fear for Garrett, all of it combining to break down her mental barriers. She blinked and saw Bishop sitting across from her in the hide, his Korean War range card in his weathered hands. He looked exactly as she remembered him from that last day at Quantico. Silver hair, Kind eyes, the ghost of a smile. You chose right, kid, the hallucination said. Messy, but right. Saved Garrett. Saved those SEALs. Completed the mission. Lot of people alive tonight because of what you did. But I violated orders, Reese whispered. I went outside my authority. I made tactical decisions that weren't mine to make. Bishop's ghost smiled, the same patient expression he'd worn when teaching her wind estimation. The right choice and the authorized choice aren't always the same thing. You know what I learned in Korea? Sometimes the only way to keep faith with the men beside you is to break faith with the men above you. You live with the consequences, but at least you live. The hallucination faded like mist in sunlight. Garrett was staring at her, his eyes glassy with fever, but aware enough to recognize she'd been talking to herself. You okay? He asked, his voice weak. Yeah, just tired. How you feeling? Like I got shot by a Chechen sniper and spent 14 hours bleeding in a hole. So you know, not great. Despite everything, Reese almost smiled. Garrett's sense of humor, dark and gallows-edged, was a sign he was still fighting, still hanging on. Hour 18. The sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The temperature dropped from unbearable to merely oppressive. Reese's water was gone. Garrett's fever was worse. She gave him her last antibiotic. It probably wouldn't be enough, but it was all she had. Hour 22. Garrett's pulse was thready, his breathing shallow. He was fading, and there wasn't much Reese could do about it, except watch and wait and pray the exfil came soon. She held his good hand, feeling how cold his fingers had become despite the heat. Hey, she whispered, stay with me. You don't get to check out yet. We've got too many range days left, too many beers to drink. You still owe me $20 from that bet about the Super Bowl. Garrett's eyes flickered open. Patriots, he mumbled. Told you? Always bet. Patriots. Yeah, you can gloat about it when we get home. Hour 28, the Taliban search had largely dispersed. Only a few teams remained going through the motions, no longer expecting to find anything. The sun was setting again, painting the mountains the same colors Reese had watched 71 hours ago when this all began. It felt like a lifetime ago, like she'd been a different person then. Hour 30. Phantom Angel Gridiron. Search pattern has dispersed enough for exfil. We have rotary wing inbound to your position. ETA 12 minutes. Pop smoke on our mark for positive ID. Reese felt tears of relief trying to form. She crushed them back with the same iron discipline that had kept her motionless for 71 hours, that had steadied her hand through 7 impossible shots, that had brought her through the last 30 hours alive. Gridiron Phantom Angel copies. Standing by for smoke mark. Advise inbound that 1 casualty requires immediate medical evacuation. Roger that, Phantom Angel. Help is on the way. Gridiron out. She shook Garrett awake as gently as she could. Hey, stay with me. Helo's coming. 12 minutes. You're going to make it. You hear me? You're going to make it. He opened his eyes, focused on her with difficulty, like he was looking at her through fog. Did we get him, the engineer? Yeah, we got him. A ghost of a smile crossed his pale lips. Was it worth it? Reese touched the pocket where Bishop's range card rested, that piece of yellowed paper that connected her to a frozen ridgeline in Korea 60 years ago, to choices made and regrets carried across decades. She thought about the choices she'd made, the consequences that would follow. The 17 Americans who would never die on roads the engineer would never rig. The 8 SEALs who'd gone home to their families. Garrett alive despite every tactical calculation, saying she should have let him die for the mission. I'll let you know in 60 years. The helicopters came in low and fast, combat-loaded door guns ready, rotor blades beating the air like thunder. Reese popped smoke when they were 30 seconds out, the orange cloud billowing up from their position like a beacon. The pilots confirmed visual and brought the bird down in a landing zone that was barely large enough, the skids settling onto rocks that shifted and cracked under the weight. Rotor wash kicked up a dust storm that covered their approach, turning the world into a brown haze of swirling debris. Navy corpsmen jumped out before the skids had fully touched ground, running to Garrett with a stretcher and medical supplies that looked like treasures from another world. They had him loaded and stabilized in under 60 seconds, starting an IV with practiced efficiency, applying real pressure dressings, treating the wound properly for the first time in 30 hours. A crew chief grabbed Reese's arm, pulling her toward the helicopter with urgent strength. Let's go, Marine. We're still in a hot zone. She let herself be pulled aboard, her legs nearly buckling as the adrenaline finally wore off and exhaustion crashed over her like a physical weight. She collapsed onto the metal floor, watched through the open door as Afghanistan dropped away beneath them, the compound where the engineer had died growing smaller. the ridgeline where she'd spent 71 hours becoming part of the stone. The valley where 7 Chechen snipers had learned that death could come from nowhere, silent and absolute. All of it shrinking until it was just another cluster of buildings in an endless landscape of mountains and desert. Another mission. Another memory to carry. Garrett was on a stretcher beside her corpsman, working on him with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, adjusting the IV flow, monitoring his blood pressure. One of them looked up and caught her eye. "He's going to make it. Lost a lot of blood, but he's stable. Good job keeping him alive out there." Reese nodded, too exhausted for words. Her throat was raw from dehydration. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her hands were shaking now that she didn't need them steady anymore. But Garrett was going to make it. The SEALs had made it. The engineer was dead. The mission was complete. The flight to the forward operating base took 43 minutes, long enough for Reese to close her eyes and see the whole engagement play out again behind her eyelids. Every shot, every decision, every moment where everything could have gone wrong and somehow hadn't. Garrett was rushed to the field hospital the moment they landed, corpsmen and doctors surrounding him, calling out medical terminology. Reese didn't fully understand but recognized as urgent. She watched him disappear through the hospital doors, then was directed to a debriefing room where she'd wait for her chain of command to decide what to do with a Marine who just completed one of the most successful sniper operations of the war, while simultaneously violating multiple direct orders. The room was small, concrete, furnished with a metal table and 2 chairs. Reese sat in one of them and waited. 6 hours later, the door opened and Major Catherine Brennan walked in. Brennan was 44 years old, a career Marine officer who'd come up through logistics before transitioning to operations. She had red hair going gray at the temples, sharp green eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for being absolutely fair and absolutely unforgiving of incompetence or insubordination. She carried a folder thick with reports. She sat down across from Reese and studied her for a long moment, those green eyes taking in every detail. The exhaustion, the stone dust still caked in the creases of Reese's uniform. The blood on her hands that wasn't hers. "Staff Sergeant Callahan," Brennan said finally. "Hell of 3 days you had." "Yes, ma'am. I've read the after-action reports. Yours. Corporal Stone's from before he went into surgery. Commander Thorne's from the SEAL team you saved. I've also reviewed the mission parameters you were given and the authority you were granted." Brennan paused, opened the folder, glanced at something inside, then closed it again. "You want to tell me what you were thinking?" Reese met her commanding officer's eyes. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "I was thinking that 8 good operators were about to die or fail their mission because 7 enemy snipers had them pinned. I had the capability to solve that problem. So I solved it. You were ordered to observe and eliminate the engineer when a safe opportunity arose, not to engage 7 hostile snipers in support of an operation you weren't briefed on or authorized to assist." "Yes, ma'am, that's correct. And then after supporting the SEAL exfil and taking casualties yourself, you chose to take a 1,000-meter shot at the engineer in a situation that was anything but safe, directly compromising your own extraction in the process." "Yes, ma'am. You understand you could be court-martialed for this multiple violations. Disobeying orders, engaging outside your authority, reckless endangerment of yourself and your spotter." "Yes, ma'am, I understand." Brennan leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. "And if you had it to do over again?" Reese didn't hesitate. The answer came from somewhere deep somewhere that had nothing to do with tactics or regulations or career advancement. Somewhere that Bishop had touched with his teaching, with his stories, with his legacy of 60 years carrying Eddie Walsh's ghost. "I'd make the same choices, ma'am." Brennan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Something that might have been approval or respect or simple recognition of one Marine seeing another make an impossible choice and own it completely. Why? Because Corporal Stone is alive. Because 8 SEALs made it home with intelligence that's already enabled 3 strikes on Taliban leadership. Because the engineer is dead and his IED network is dismantled, which means American soldiers aren't going to die on roads he turned into kill zones. Reese paused, then continued. "The mission parameters were important, ma'am, but keeping good people alive and completing the actual objective mattered more." The silence that followed stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Brennan stared at her, those sharp green eyes, searching for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she allowed herself a small smile. "SOCOM is putting you in for a Silver Star. Commander Thorne wrote a personal testimony describing your actions as the most exceptional combat marksmanship he's witnessed in 15 years of special operations. The intelligence the SEALs extracted has already led to the capture or killing of 3 high-value targets and the disruption of a major weapons trafficking network. She paused and the smile faded. You're also receiving an official letter of reprimand to be placed in your sealed file. The Marine Corps needs to maintain discipline and chain of command even when the violations achieve positive results. You understand that? Yes, ma'am. Good. Brennan stood. Now get out of my office and go check on your spotter. He's out of surgery and asking for you. Reese stood, came to attention despite her exhaustion. Thank you, ma'am. Callahan, one more thing. Ma'am? Brennan's expression softened just slightly, just enough to show the human being beneath the officer. Gunnery Sergeant Bishop would have been proud of you. He taught you well. Reese felt her throat tighten. She'd carried Bishop's range card through 71 hours in that hide, through 12 minutes of impossible shooting, through 30 hours of siege. She'd heard his voice in her head when the rifle jammed, when Garrett was hit, when she had to choose between the mission and the man. And now, hearing that he would have been proud, something broke open inside her that she'd been holding closed since the moment she'd pulled that trigger and sent the engineer to whatever waited beyond this world. Yes, ma'am, she managed. He did. 8 months later, the Silver Star ceremony took place back in the States at Marine Corps Base Quantico in a small auditorium with limited attendance because the mission details were still classified and would remain so for years. Reese stood at attention in her dress blues while a 2-star general she'd never met pinned the medal to her chest and read a citation that carefully omitted most of the actual details of what she'd done. Staff Sergeant Reese Callahan distinguished herself through extraordinary heroism in combat operations against enemy forces. Through exceptional marksmanship and decisive judgment under fire, she eliminated 26 enemy combatants at extended range while providing critical support to friendly forces in contact. The general's voice carried across the small auditorium, formal and distant. Her actions directly enabled the success of a classified special operations mission and prevented numerous friendly casualties. Staff Sergeant Callahan's conduct reflects the highest standards of military service and brings great credit upon herself, the Marine Corps, and the United States of America. The general shook her hand. People applauded. The ceremony concluded with the same formal precision as it had begun, but Reese barely heard any of it because her eyes had locked onto 2 people sitting in the 3rd row of the small audience. Corporal Garrett Stone, fully recovered from his wound back on active duty, the scar on his shoulder hidden beneath his dress uniform. He gave her a subtle nod and the hint of a smile, the kind of acknowledgement that passed between people who'd bled together and survived. And next to him, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes that looked remarkably like the eyes Reese remembered from 3 weeks of training at Quantico 2 years ago, Margaret Bishop, Frank Bishop's widow. After the ceremony, as people milled around offering congratulations that felt hollow and distant, Margaret approached Reese with slow, careful steps. She was 71 years old, and the years showed in the way she moved, in the lines on her face, in the careful way she navigated the crowd. But her presence commanded respect, just as her husband's had. There was something in the way she carried herself, in the directness of her gaze, that spoke of a lifetime lived with a man who'd seen the worst humanity could offer and still chosen to teach, to give, to pass forward what he'd learned. Mrs. Bishop, Reese said, her voice catching slightly, I didn't know you'd be here. Major Brennan contacted me. Said this was a ceremony I shouldn't miss. Margaret looked at the silver star on Reese's chest, the metal glinting under the fluorescent lights. Frank wrote about you in his last letter, just a few days before he died. He said you were the best student he'd ever taught, said you understood the old ways better than Marines half your age. Reese felt tears threatening. She'd cried at Bishop's funeral 18 months ago, standing in the rain while they lowered him into the ground at Arlington with full military honors. 7 riflemen firing 3 volleys into the gray sky. Taps played on a bugle that sounded like heartbreak given voice. But these tears were different, sharper, more personal. Mrs. Bishop. I tried to honor everything he taught me, tried to apply his lessons in a way that would make him proud. I'm not sure I succeeded. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope yellowed with age, sealed with wax in the old style that nobody used anymore. The kind of seal that spoke of deliberation, of ceremony, of something meant to last. Frank wrote this for you 2 weeks before he died. He asked me to give it to you when the time was right. I think this is that time. Reese took the envelope with trembling hands. Her name was written on the front in Bishop's distinctive handwriting, precise and controlled, even in his final days. The letters formed with the careful discipline of a man whose hands had steadied through 1,000 rifle scopes, through frozen nights in Korea, through 60 years of teaching young Marines the difference between shooting and sniping. He knew he was dying, Reese asked softly. He knew his heart was failing. The doctors had given him 3 months. He made it to 2. Margaret's eyes were clear despite the pain of memory. He said he didn't mind, said he'd lived longer than most Marines who'd been through what he'd been through, said he'd done his job, passed on what needed passing on. The only thing that worried him was whether you'd understand the hardest lesson. What lesson was that? Margaret touched Reese's hand gently, the contact brief but warm. Read the letter. He explains it better than I could. She turned to leave, then paused, looking back at Reese with an expression that held both sorrow and something else, something like hope. Frank struggled with Korea for 60 years, Reese. Every single day he woke up and thought about the friend he'd lost, the choice he'd made. It ate at him in ways you wouldn't know unless you lived with him, through the nightmares and the quiet mornings when he'd sit and stare at the old photographs. Her eyes met Reese's, and in that gaze was a warning and a plea. Don't let the weight of your choices destroy you. Feel them, honor them, learn from them. But don't let them consume you the way they consumed Frank. That's not the legacy he wanted to leave. Margaret Bishop walked away, leaving Reese standing alone in the emptying auditorium, holding an envelope from a dead teacher who had shaped her into the Marine she'd become. She waited until she was alone in her quarters that evening before she opened it. The letter was written in the same precise handwriting as Bishop's Korean War range card. The letters formed with the careful control of a man whose hands had steadied through 1,000 rifle scopes. Reese, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Good. Means I don't have to watch you make the same mistakes I did, though I suspect you'll make some version of them anyway. That's how teaching works. We pass on the lessons we learned, but every generation has to learn them fresh through their own pain. Korea taught me that perfect shots don't matter much if you can't live with who you became while making them. I made a lot of perfect shots in that war, saved a lot of lives, also made a lot of hard choices that seemed right at the time and have haunted me every day since. Eddie Walsh was my best friend. He died because I let him volunteer for a mission that killed him. I told myself it was the right tactical decision, that the mission mattered more than one man, that he volunteered knowing the risks. All of that was true. None of it made waking up without him any easier. For 60 years, I've asked myself if there was another way. If I'd been smarter or faster or better, could I have found a solution that kept him alive and still accomplished the mission? I'll never know. That's the curse of command decisions. You only get to make them once, and you live with the result forever. You're going to face choices like that, Reese. Maybe you already have by the time you read this. Choices where every option is terrible and someone gets hurt no matter what you decide. Mission versus men. Orders versus conscience. The right thing versus the authorized thing. When that moment comes, and it will come, here's what I want you to understand. Don't ask yourself what I would do. Don't ask what the general in the operations center would do. Don't ask what the book says to do. Ask yourself, what kind of Marine do I want to be? What choice can I live with when I'm 70 years old, looking back at this moment? There's no right answer. Anyone who tells you there is hasn't faced the choice yet. There's only the answer you can carry, the one that lets you look in the mirror each morning without hating what you see. I chose mission over friendship in Korea, followed orders, did what the book said. I see Eddie's face every morning in that mirror. Ask him if I made the right call. He never answers. You're better than me, Callahan, smarter, more aware of the costs. When your moment comes, you'll make your choice, and it'll be the choice you can carry. That's all any of us can do. Just remember this. The mission isn't just what's written in the operation order. The real mission, the one that matters, is keeping faith with the people who trust you. Sometimes that means following orders, sometimes breaking them. You'll know which when the moment arrives. Make your choice. Live with it. Then teach someone else so they can make theirs. That's the legacy that matters. Not the perfect shots, not the medals, not the mission success statistics. The legacy is what you pass on to the next generation. The wisdom bought with your pain, given freely so maybe they suffer a little less. I taught you the old ways because they work, because human skill endures when technology fails, because a Marine who understands fundamentals can adapt to any situation. But the oldest way of all, the one that goes back to the first warrior who taught the second warrior, is this. Take care of the people who fight beside you. When you have to choose between the mission and the men, there's no chart or manual that can tell you which to pick. You just have to decide who you are and what you can live with. I chose one way. You'll choose yours. I can't tell you it'll be easier. Just different. Keep shooting straight. Keep teaching what I taught you. Keep making those perfect shots that save lives. And when the choices get hard, when you're 70 years old looking back, I hope you find more peace than I did. Semper Fi, kid. It's been an honor. Frank Reese read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face before she carefully folded it and placed it in the same waterproof case where she kept Bishop's Korean War range card. 2 pieces of paper, 2 generations of Marines, 2 men who'd made impossible choices in frozen Korea and dusty Afghanistan and carried the weight of those choices across years and miles and battles that would never make it into the history books. She fell asleep that night with the case on her chest, her hand resting over it like a talisman, and dreamed of ridgelines she'd never seen, and a young Marine named Eddie Walsh, who died 60 years before she was born, but whose death had somehow reached across decades to save her life, to teach her what mattered, to show her that the hardest choices were the ones that defined who you were when everything else was stripped away. 2 years later, in 2013, Gunnery Sergeant Reese Callahan stood at the front of a classroom at Marine Corps Base Quantico, addressing 32 students in the Scout Sniper Basic Course. She'd been promoted to Gunnery Sergeant 6 months after the Afghanistan mission, a rapid advancement that came with her Silver Star and the classified recommendation from SOCOM that she be utilized as a training asset. She'd spent the last 18 months running joint operations with SEAL Teams Delta Force and CIA Special Activities units, providing sniper overwatch for some of the most dangerous missions being conducted in the global war on terror. Her official kill count remained classified, though anyone who'd worked beside her understood it was significant. What mattered more to the Marine Corps was that having Gunnery Sergeant Callahan on a mission meant friendly forces had overwatch from someone capable of making shots that shouldn't be possible and solving tactical problems no one else could touch. But she'd also discovered something in those 18 months of continuous operations. She was tired. Tired of the killing, tired of the deployments, tired of the weight of all those choices and all those shots and all those moments where she'd had to decide who lived and who died. Bishop's letter had been right. She carried every decision, every shot, every face, and the weight was getting heavier. So when the opportunity came to rotate back to Quantico as a guest instructor to teach the next generation of Marine Scout snipers, she'd taken it without hesitation. Now she stood where Bishop had stood, looking at students who reminded her of herself 3 years ago. Eager, skilled, confident in their technology and their training, not yet understanding how hard the real choices would be. One student raised her hand. Corporal Avery Sinclair, 24 years old, top of her class in marksmanship, hungry to prove herself in a field still dominated by men who didn't always believe women belonged there. Gunnery Sergeant Callahan, is it true you eliminated 7 enemy snipers in 12 minutes during Operation Enduring Freedom? The mission was still classified in its details, but the broad strokes had become legend in the sniper community. The ghost who'd saved a SEAL team and disappeared into the Afghan mountains. The Marine who'd made impossible shots and lived to teach about them. Reese nodded. Yes, Corporal, that's true. How did you stay calm? 7 targets, 12 minutes, SEALs counting on you. How did you not freeze up? Reese thought about how to answer. Thought about Bishop's teaching. Thought about the truth versus the legend. Decided the truth mattered more. I didn't stay calm, she said finally. I was terrified. My rifle jammed on the 3rd shot. I nearly got my spotter killed. My hands were shaking before the first shot, and I was second-guessing every decision I made. The students looked surprised. The legend hadn't included those details. Legends never did. But I had a teacher, Gunnery Sergeant Frank Bishop, Korean War veteran. He taught me that fear is just information. It tells you the stakes are high. It doesn't get to dictate what you do. He drilled fundamentals into me until they were reflex. So when the fear came, when the rifle jammed, when everything was falling apart, I had something deeper than calm to rely on. I had training, preparation, fundamentals. Another student raised his hand. What's the secret to making impossible shots, Gunnery Sergeant? Reese walked to the wall of the classroom where she'd mounted Bishop's Korean War range card in a frame. The students had asked about it on the first day of class. This yellowed piece of paper covered in faded handwriting displayed like a religious relic. Now she gestured to it. The secret is there's no secret, just an old Marine who cared enough to teach me, and my willingness to honor that teaching by preparing thoroughly for every mission. Those 7 snipers everyone asks about, I'd been observing them for 71 hours before I fired the first shot. I knew their routines, their rotations, their skill levels, their positions down to the meter. When it was time to act, I'd already rehearsed the engagement without knowing it. Sinclair raised her hand again. Did you ever regret any of your shots, Gunnery Sergeant? The question hung in the air. The classroom went quiet. This was the question they all wanted to ask, but most were afraid to. The question that separated the shooters from the snipers, the technicians from the warriors. Reese thought about the engineer, about the Taliban fighters she'd killed during the SEAL exfil, about every trigger pull across 8 years of service. Every day, she said quietly, not because they were wrong shots, they were necessary. They saved American lives. But taking a life, even an enemy's life, even when it's justified and necessary, it costs you something. Anyone who tells you different hasn't done it enough to understand the weight. She paused, making sure they were listening, making sure they understood this was the most important thing she would teach them. Regret doesn't mean the shots were wrong. It means you're human enough to feel the weight of what you've done. The day you stop feeling that weight is the day you need to stop doing this job. The students were silent, processing this. Some of them looked uncomfortable, some looked thoughtful. A few looked like they were beginning to understand what she was really teaching them. My teacher, Gunnery Sergeant Bishop, made a choice in Korea that saved his squad and cost his best friend's life. He carried that choice for 60 years. It was the right tactical decision. It achieved the mission, and it haunted him every morning until the day he died. Reese looked at them. That's the reality of what we do. We make hard choices. We live with them. We try to learn from them so we can teach you to maybe make better ones. After class, Sinclair approached Reese at the range where she was setting up for the afternoon's practical exercise. Gunnery Sergeant, can I ask you something? Go ahead, Corporal. Why did you become an instructor? You're legendary in the community. You could write your own ticket for any special operations unit in the military. Why come back here to teach? Reese looked downrange at the targets set at various distances, looked at the mountains beyond, thought about Bishop, his letter, the legacy that mattered. Because Gunnery Sergeant Bishop gave me skills that saved lives. Mine and others. If I can give you those same skills, if I can teach you to make hard choices and live with them and pass that knowledge on to the next generation, then his legacy continues. That's the mission now, Corporal. Not making perfect shots, making perfect students who become perfect teachers. She picked up her rifle, the same M40A3 she'd carried in Afghanistan. You were struggling with wind estimation yesterday. Let me show you something. Stop thinking so much. Feel the wind. Sinclair looked skeptical. But Gunnery Sergeant, the ballistic computer gives us precise data. And it's failed you 3 times this week. Try something different. Try the old ways. Reese held up her finger, licked it, felt. The wind turned her face to the breeze, watched the mirage through her scope. All the techniques Bishop had taught her in this exact spot 3 years ago. Korea, 1,950 inches, she said, echoing Bishop's teaching method. Gunnery Sergeant Bishop was on a frozen ridgeline with a shot he had to make to save 40 Marines. His rangefinder was frozen. His scope was fogged. No technology, just skills that went back generations. He made the shot at 1,100 meters because he'd learned to read the wind with his body, not a machine. She demonstrated the technique, walking Sinclair through each step, explaining the why behind the what. Sinclair tried it, adjusted her hold based on feel rather than data. Fired. The target at 1,000 meters lit up. Perfect center mass. It worked. Sinclair's eyes were wide with surprise. How did that work? Because human skill endures, Corporal. Technology is a tool. It makes you better when it works. But the day it fails, and it will fail, what do you have left? Only the fundamentals. Only the old ways. Only what you built into your bones through practice and repetition and understanding. 3 months later, Reese was back on the range with Sinclair running advanced scenarios. The younger Marine had progressed rapidly, absorbing everything Reese taught with the same hunger Reese had shown with Bishop. The same dedication, the same willingness to embrace the old ways while mastering the new. They were working on extended range shots when suddenly Reese's encrypted phone rang. She pulled it out, saw the secured line indicator, the priority channel that meant someone was in trouble somewhere in the world. She answered, "Callahan." The voice on the other end was shaking. Female, young, desperate. "Phantom Angel, this is Shadowhawk." Reese's blood went cold. Shadowhawk. That was a call sign she recognized, but not from Sinclair standing beside her. It was Lieutenant Emma Sinclair, Avery's cousin, a Marine Reese had trained 6 months ago during a specialized course at Fort Benning, now deployed to Helmand Province. "Emma, what's wrong?" The voice was breaking terror, barely held in check by training and discipline. "I'm pinned. 7 Taliban snipers. SEAL team trapped. My spotter's wounded. I have a shot on the HVT, but it will expose my position. Mission says, wait, but my spotter's bleeding out. I don't know what to do. What would you do? The exact same scenario. A new generation, a new war, but the same impossible choice. Reese closed her eyes, saw Bishop's face, saw Garrett bleeding in that fallback position, his life measured in hours and draining away with every heartbeat. Saw 7 Chechen snipers through her scope. Saw every choice she'd made and every consequence she'd carried. She opened her eyes. Emma, listen to me carefully. I can't tell you what to do. Only you can make that choice. But ask yourself, what kind of Marine do you want to be? What choice can you live with when you're 70 years old looking back at this moment? A long silence on the line. Reese could hear Emma's breathing, rapid and scared. Could hear gunfire in the background. Could hear someone screaming for a corpsman. I can't let him die. I can't. Then you know your answer. But the mission is keeping faith with the people who trust you. Make your choice. Live with it. Then someday teach someone else to make theirs. A pause. Then the sound of a suppressed gunshot over the phone. Shadowhawk engaging. Spotters moving. HVT down. We're going to make it. Reese exhaled, tears streaming down her face. Good shooting, Lieutenant. Welcome to the legacy. Phantom Angel, thank you for everything Bishop taught you. Everything you taught me. Semper Fi, Shadowhawk. Get home safe. She hung up, turned to the classroom where Avery and the other students were watching in silence, having heard only Reese's half of the conversation, but understanding enough to know something important had just happened. That was my student, in Afghanistan right now, facing the same choice I faced, the same choice Bishop faced in Korea. She held up Bishop's Korean War Range card framed on the wall. This has been passed down for 63 years, Korea to Afghanistan to here, from Frank Bishop to me to you, from teacher to student across 3 generations. One day, one of you will carry it. You'll face impossible choices. You'll teach the next generation. She pointed to the range card's motto, handwritten in faded ink, that had survived 6 decades. One shot, one breath, one legacy. That's the mission. Not the perfect shots, not the medals, not the mission success rates. The legacy you pass forward. The sun was setting again, painting the world in those same colors that had witnessed her 71 hours in a hide, her 12 minutes of impossible shooting, her 30 hours of siege. Somewhere out there, other Marines were facing their own hard choices, making their own impossible shots, carrying their own weights. And someday they'd come back and teach the next generation. Pass on the old ways, continue the legacy, the mission that never ended. Reese picked up her rifle, settled behind the scope, and demonstrated one more technique for Sinclair. The fundamentals that had kept her alive. The wisdom bought with pain, the skills that endured when everything else failed. Watch closely, Corporal, she said. I'm going to show you something Gunnery Sergeant Bishop taught me, something he learned in Korea in 1950, something that's been passed down from one generation of snipers to the next for 63 years. She demonstrated. Sinclair watched with complete attention, learning, growing, becoming. And in that moment, Reese understood what Bishop had tried to tell her in his letter. The legacy wasn't the shots she'd made. It was the shots Sinclair would make someday using these same techniques. And the shots Sinclair's students would make after that, and their students after them. An unbroken chain reaching back to frozen ridges in Korea and forward into wars not yet imagined. That was what mattered. That was the mission. That was enough. Reese Callahan, Gunnery Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, settled into her shooting position and continued teaching. Because that's what Marines did. They learned from those who came before. They served with those beside them. They taught those who came after. One shot, one breath, one lesson at a time.